It is an understatement to say that my family had a tumultuous history with the police. When I was growing up in a very impoverished part in rural Tennessee, both of my cousins were raided twice, and my father spent the majority of his adult life incarcerated as a group of teenagers. We used to play a game where we pretended to evade the law enforcement. There were a lot of these encounters because we spent much of our time drinking or exploring abandoned buildings. Many jokes about bacon and donuts were made as a result. I was 16 years old and on my way home from a party one Saturday night. Everyone in my car, including my best friend Cade, was rather inebriated by this point, including myself. I recall restraining myself from dozing off as I peered out the window. And then, out of nowhere, before I could really comprehend what was happening, there was this tremendous blast. Car overturned. Furthermore, I am still unable to explain what transpired. Not even Cade was fastened to his seatbelt and was forced out of the car. Despite being bruised and with glass in my face, I was fine. I felt no pain. I don't know if it was the drink or the adrenaline. In a flash, I pried open my car door and stepped out. Cade lay bleeding horribly on the ground. Cade was out cold, so I ripped off my shirt in an attempt to staunch the bleeding. In an effort to rouse him, I made many attempts, but he still wouldn't budge. Even my other traveling companion in the back managed to disembark from the vehicle. Even though he was unable to move due to his severely damaged leg, he managed to give me his phone. So I quickly contacted 911 before paramedics could reach. The police had already arrived at the site. I had never seen an officer do anything other than make an arrest and throw someone in jail before now. As a result, I was unprepared. I expected him to attempt to assist, and then we'd be handcuffed. Though I was mistaken, I didn't know the cop, but he swooped in to help Cade get back on his feet. It was a stroke of luck that he managed to revive him before the paramedics came. My buddies and I were escorted home in a safe manner by the officer. Even though we had a pleasant chat, I was the last to go home. He offered to let me tag along on numerous ride-alongs and had many interesting anecdotes to tell about his career. As a result, picture this. A few years down the road, I astonished everyone I knew by deciding to enroll in police academy. I could see why some of my loved ones were pulling away. I dove headfirst into my new profession and haven't stopped since. I found work in an Appalachian mountain hamlet in Tennessee. I was disappointed to not be in a larger city with more exciting things to do at first, but I soon learned that keeping the residents of this little town safe was far more challenging than I had anticipated. There may not be many gangs, cartels, and murder cases, but there have been many bizarre and intriguing calls. The night when Michelle said she hit someone with her car on a rural road is the one that stands out in my memory. I rushed out the door because it was a rather quiet night. I spent a solid 20 minutes trekking through the dense forest to reach this spot. At the time of my arrival, her little Honda Civic was parked on the shoulder. I pulled up behind her and started pounding on the window. When she heard the tap, she nearly leaped out of her skin. Michelle lowered her window while clenching her fists. Her smudged dark eye makeup dripped down her cheeks, visible to me. She obviously had been inconsolable. "Madam, what transpired this evening?" "Excuse me," I inquired. I was returning home from a friend's house when, out of nowhere, a little boy dashed in front of my car, and even though I swerved, I managed to collide with him. Tears welled up in her eyes. It was obvious she wasn't intoxicated, and she obviously felt bad about what had transpired. The boy Michelle hit looked to be around 9 or 10 years old. Michelle continued to tell me she was unsure of its origin because there were no adjacent houses. The youngster was hurt. According to her account, he walked with an unusually crooked leg. It was then that she sprinted out of the vehicle to lend him a hand. However, his behavior was far from typical for a severely damaged child. He looked like he was in agony, but he didn't yell, weep, or act terrified. Though he was obviously terrified, he couldn't get to his feet. Forcibly returning to her vehicle, Michelle retrieved her phone and dialed 911 in a state of panic. She observed the youngster standing at her window, requesting to be taken into her car. While she was on the phone with dispatch, upon noticing his presence, Her phone abruptly shut down. She had thankfully before provided her whereabouts. She froze when she started to open the car door. She told me that out of nowhere, something didn't feel right. At 11 o'clock at night, her more reasonable brain began to ponder why a child would be racing through the woods alone. His parents had vanished. There may be some careless parents in the world, but there certainly weren't any houses in this area. That being the case, why was he venturing out on his own, even though he had just been struck by an automobile? He stood tall and seemed unhurt. Michelle felt compelled to let him in anyhow, so she did so despite her fears. She did strike the child, after all, but her attention was drawn to his gaze. They were completely opaque, lacking any trace of white or iris. She tried to close the door even though it was only slightly open. Despite her best efforts, the little girl managed to pry it open again, in a low voice. He expressed his gratitude for being allowed in. At this stage, he seemed to be cheerful and uninjured. At that moment, the boy started laughing a crazy, unsettling laugh, not a carefree, innocent one. After pushing him aside, Michelle slammed the door and drove away. And just a short distance later, she came to a halt when her engine started to overheat. The boy was returned by the time she glanced out her window. He repeatedly rapped on her car window, alternating between pleading for admission and threatening to lock herself out if she refused. Michelle kept her car door locked and shied away from making eye contact. She waited for a few minutes of stillness before turning to check on the boy. He was no longer there. She started looking for her car charger in the console after exhaling a sigh of relief. She glanced up from her distracted state to find the boy leaning against the windshield as she heard a second tap on the glass. According to her, he was severely disfigured and covered in blood all over. "I need your assistance," I said. He muttered, his voice barely audible through the glass, in a fit of hysteria. Michelle attempted to start her automobile multiple times, but to no avail. Once she glanced up again, he had vanished. Until I got there, she just sat there, sobbing and terrified. And so I searched high and low, but the lad remained elusive. But I must admit that I wasn't really giving it my all. The encounter with the black-eyed children was not my first. Thus, I am aware that the urban legend is well known. To be honest, I don't know if Michelle was. I didn't want to add to her already considerable emotional distress, so I concentrated on ensuring her safe return home. This is the typical plot point for tales with black-eyed youngsters. Kids will unexpectedly show up at your door or in your car, claiming they're lost and need to get in touch with their parents. They appear to be somewhat typical, with the exception that their attire is often that of the past. Next thing you know, you're staring into their completely black eyes. You could also find their behavior peculiar. The majority of individuals who come into contact with black-eyed children describe them as being exceptionally quiet and devoid of any expression. So, I tagged along with Michelle as she drove home after her car started up again. I made note of her number. I informed her that I would contact her again if further details regarding the accident were required, but I had a feeling we wouldn't. Then, tragically, 2 months after that, Michelle went away. She drove across a bridge that gave way while visiting relatives in another state. Her vehicle stood alone on a tiny bridge that desperately needed repairs. Some have suggested that this is merely coincidental. However, in my opinion, that is not the case. The aftereffects of encounters with the supernatural can be long-lasting. It occurred to me that Michelle might have seen anything from that bridge before she passed away. Perhaps a young boy with a fractured leg caught her. Well, that was another unforgettable call. It began in a somewhat stranger way. Casey, a man in his 60s with a troubled past of drug using and psychosis, called us. Typically, he would not be the one to initiate contact. In the past, it would be members of his family or neighbors calling, expressing their displeasure or concern over his actions. The dispatcher was informed by Casey that he had heard noise outdoors. He rolled up his porch screen, and there he saw the pizza delivery guy placing a pie on the ground. Despite Casey's denial, the driver maintained that an order had been placed for pizza at this address that very night. Even Casey's landline number was the same as the caller. The driver was directed to place the pizza in front of the porch per the order. At the base of the porch stairs, There was even a $20 bill meant for the pizza. After an altercation with the driver, Casey sent him packing and collected the $20. Casey thought the youngsters from the neighborhood were playing a practical joke on him because they had teased him before. Therefore, I did not rush to get there as there was no pressing threat to my safety, despite Casey's unfriendliness. For police enforcement, I'd never had an issue with him. After hearing him out, I assumed it was all an elaborate hoax or something he conjured up. Having said that, I thought it would be prudent to look beneath the porch just in case. The condition of Casey's old house was less than ideal. The wooden fence that had once encased his porch was now decaying, exposing an empty space beneath his porch. Consequently, I peered through it while my flashlight was on. A couple of empty beer cans and what appeared to be pieces of uncooked meat caught my eye, so I wanted to know if Casey ever hung around under the porch. He gave me the evil eye and told me no. He was quite the eccentric, which is something I never would have guessed, so I thought it was prudent to inquire. I chose to investigate further by looking under the porch, and I nearly fell into this enormous hole in the ground as I wriggled around. It appeared like someone had been living there, so I shone my flashlight down to demonstrate it to him. After that, Casey started swearing profusely. I'd wager $20 on that being my $20 bill and my beer. I'll take it personally if some moron decides they may remain on my land. I will descend to that level. Plus, he exhibited a level of agility that I was unaware of. After Casey dove beneath the porch, he proceeded to, "Holy cow." There was an ecstatic cry from me. I had to keep close behind him to prevent any harm from coming to him. I raised my voice to warn him that I would have to summon reinforcements if he persisted. I wanted to stay away from this because Casey had a history of getting pink slips, which had never helped her. Because of my background, I believe I was more understanding and patient with him. After cautiously descending the cave entrance, I reached a spacious region with still another entrance. Even though I yelled after Casey, he remained silent. I stooped down, moved over to the hole, and peered through it with my flashlight. I stepped inside. I had to stoop to fit, and the cavern split in half along the way. As I peered down the left side, I suddenly heard rustling to my right and spun around to see what appeared to be an elderly man. And by elderly, I mean at least 90 years old. Except for his numerous apparent veins, he appeared ghostly, white, quite translucent, and the cloudiness of his white eyes. He hissed at me in a chilling way as he dashed back into the tunnel as soon as he spotted the light. I could hardly maintain the flashlight's stability at this point. My mistake was obvious to me. Venturing into an unexplored network of subterranean caverns without a safety net was definitely not the way to do things. I was preparing to go back the way I had come. A man's scream sounded exactly like Casey's to me. I then headed in the direction of the noise. By the time I got to a big circular area of the cave, I could see many more of the white-eyed people. I lowered the beam of my flashlight until it was pointing downwards. What looked like a family was there, of varying sexes and ages. They all had white hair, and the youngest one looked to be about 12 years old. At regular intervals, they tapped the cave signs and made this weird clicking sounds. Subsequently, I observed Casey confined in one corner, encircled by an unfamiliar family. As they inched closer to him, he screamed and cried out in an attempt to ward them off. Mercifully, they had failed to notice my entrance. I let out a warning shot into the earth, but it bounced off a rock and struck the family's adult male member. A chorus of cries erupted, and everyone sprinted to his rescue. While they were preoccupied, I severed Casey's ropes and ordered them to come after me so we could escape quickly. These pale-skinned beings chased after us. The good news is, he appeared to be significantly slower after I shone my high beam flashlight at them. Suddenly, Casey's yelling could be heard from behind me. He was stuck in a deep hole from which there was no way to escape. I was also uncertain about my ability to assist him if I descended to his level. I defied my better judgment and descended to aid Casey nevertheless. We then started to seek for an alternate exit strategy. I came onto this opportunity. It extended into adjacent caverns. With every stride, the ground cracked due to its roughness. We were walking on bones, as I noticed when I looked down. It was easy to tell that some of them were animal bones and others were not. After that, it became completely dark. My light no longer works. As soon as Casey began to scream, I covered his lips with my palm. Out of my pocket, I removed a matchbook. As we persisted in exploring the cavern network, as for me, I was concerned that we were reversing our course and heading further lower. The tunnels were getting progressively smaller. A huge cave, however, became accessible when we discovered an alternate entrance. My foot went into a shallow pool of water as I advanced. Eventually, Casey found a little cocaine flashlight. After rummaging through his pockets, evidently, he failed to remember to bring it with him. Even though it wasn't very bright, it was an improvement over the previous. We came to a stop at the brink of an underground pond, and I beheld what seemed like a path leading upwards on the opposite side. Maybe I was overly hopeful, but I thought I could make out the moonlight peeking through, know how to swim. I questioned Casey, on which he gave a subtle nod. We removed our shoes and extra layers before plunging into the sea. Upon Casey's illumination, I saw the presence of fish. They, too, were see-through and eyeless. I perceived a splash emanating from behind us as we approached the midpoint of the pond. The elderly man dove in and was swimming rapidly in our direction. Casey and I swam over in a panic. Casey began shouting as soon as I stepped out. The guy was dragging him back into the water while holding him by the legs. I seized Casey and hit the man. The elderly man, imposing as he seemed, fought valiantly, but in the end, he released his grip. Quickly, Casey climbed out of the pool. I quickly expressed my intention to leave, and we hastened up the tunnel. Fortunately, we did manage to find an opening. A few miles away from Casey's house, it was in a forested region. Thus, we returned to my car via book. That night, I personally covered Casey's hotel bill. He mentioned discussing the possibility of relocating to an apartment with his case manager. On one occasion, I was sent to assist a farmer who had set up a trail camera to catch the creatures who were stealing his hens, evading the live traps. Strange things started happening after only a few days of him having it up. A strange, possibly 7-foot-tall, bipedal beast was visible in the blurry film, sporting a set of antlers. However, it was most assuredly not a deer. Its hair looked matted and tangled, and it was quite thin. Several open sores were spotted on its body. Regardless of the video's quality, it was immediately obvious that this was an unfamiliar species to me. I looked all throughout the neighborhood, but nothing came up. I just told the farmer to call me if he noticed anything out of the ordinary. I would have preferred a more upbeat conclusion to this tale, but a few weeks down the road, I was summoned to a crime scene. Some livestock on the same property were brutally killed and nearly torn to pieces. The farmer must have gone outside to see how they were doing, but alas, he met the same end. We verified the film from the trail cams, which were still operational, and found that recording had ceased at midnight, back to starting at 4 in the morning. Naturally, the event had to have transpired some time between midnight and 4 in the morning. Because of this lack of information, we were unable to resolve this case. While off duty, I had a really unsettling incident. I walked into a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town right after my shift ended. About 5 in the morning came. The time, thus, the proprietor and I were the sole attendees. After he brought me my morning coffee, eggs, and bacon, we had a little conversation before he returned to the kitchen. A man strolled in just before my meal was served. Truly, he stood tall, slim, appearing to be no more than 30 years old at the most, even in those with serious substance abuse problems. I had never seen cheekbones sunken like his. In addition, his complexion was somewhat grayish. In a booth at the back, he took a seat alone. With his hood pulled up, he sported trousers and a black sweatshirt. In order to take his order, the owner went back to the dining area. The man remained silent, directing everyone's attention on his desires. I continued to savor my dinner and paid him little mind despite the man's peculiar demeanor and actions. Ultimately, he wasn't causing any trouble or breaking any laws by struggling. The proprietor returned the man's receipt once he had finished eating. The guy patiently awaited the owner's departure before he strode serenely out the door. "Stop," the owner shouted. Despite my exhaustion, I assured the owner that I would take care of it. I had known him for quite some time, in the end. The owner was just behind me as I pursued this weak-looking man. Into the street, on the fringe of a forest, I caught up to the robber. He resisted my efforts to handcuff him when I grabbed him. I caught him looking abnormal, but I was able to place one of his hands in handcuffs. The students seemed off. I can only say that they resembled negative indications. Like the eyes of a goat, when he grinned, his teeth didn't appear human, and the space between his lips was abnormally wide. The small triangles were sharp and uneven. With my hand on my gun, I released myself from my restraints and shoved him into the forest. His body was quickly changing as he rolled over, fell over, and then stood partially upright while slouching. His hair started growing out of his skin, and he stooped till he was crawling, descending into the woods. He subtly assumed the appearance of a coyote. The proprietor obviously did not get payment for that lunch. A mother of a small child made the last call that will be etched in my memory, anxious that her daughter, who was 4 years old at the time, had gone missing. She contacted the station one evening. I went out to their house with a couple of other policemen. It was in a very remote and rural region. A woman who spoke with us in an effort to identify her daughter Emma described her as having brown hair, blue eyes, and a white shirt and pants outfit. Outside, on the swing set, she had been playing. She must have strayed while her mother went inside to whip up a meal, however. Emma was not known to wander off on her own, according to her mother. After 20 minutes of searching the woods and yelling for her daughter, Emma's mom still couldn't locate her. On top of that, she frequently accused herself of being careless, indicating that she was deeply guilty. My goal was to be of assistance and comfort to her. I understood the terror that may ensue when my children walked off on occasion. When they were little, anyone could have been a victim, you know. We will locate her, I assured her, assuring her I spoke. As a result, my fellow officers and I decided to go in separate routes. It was just past sunset, but the dense forest canopy cast a nearly black shadow over the landscape. I was out for around 30 minutes when I came across an unusual building. It was circular and constructed from various forest-found objects, including branches, mud, and other miscellaneous items. Perched on the ground, it resembled a gigantic bird's nest. This monstrosity measured at least 15 feet in diameter on each side. My next step was to go up to it and peer inside. A little kid was fast asleep in the center of it, as far as I could tell. As soon as I saw the photos, I recognized Emma. There were knots in her hair. In addition, grime had caked across her white shirt. To get Emma to open her eyes, I lightly tapped on her shoulder. You could see the terror on her face. Listen, I understand. I informed her that I was planning to return her to her mom. Emma appeared perplexed. My mom is already in the woods, she informed me. She recounted how her mother's voice came to her from the forest. When she was swinging on the playground set, someone told Emma to go after her. Emma followed because she knew there was a surprise ahead of her, but she ended up getting lost. On rare occasions, she would attempt to imitate her mother's voice. When she finally reached the strange nest, she was so exhausted that she dozed off. No one else seems to be around here. As we walked, I took up Emma and started to walk her back. There was total silence in the forest. No breeze, no birds, no creatures. Look at this, Emma said, gesturing at something. A doll, that was. I retrieved it and then sat Emma down, with the exception of the hair. It was primarily composed of sticks and leaves. As unsettling as that may sound, it appeared to be genuine hair. The garment was adorned with a narrow strip of white fabric. The doll was brought along by me. I saw something unsettling as we kept walking. Emma wore a shirt with a missing sleeve and a side cut to her hair. My skin crawled. Emma sobbed with joy upon seeing her mom again after I returned her to her. I should have shown her the toy sooner. I took the doll to someone I knew who was an expert in removing such items. Even though I've encountered some situations that have made me feel sick to my stomach, I will never give up. Everyone here is wonderful, and I adore this town. Additionally, exercise caution on the back roads in the event that you encounter anything unusual. When traveling in this direction, gear is finally available, and I wanted to take a moment to thank all of the patrons who who have supported us. Scroll down to find the link. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night.